This is Bricks and Clicks, where Cliff Hudson and Craig Miller explore the real conversations and innovative strategies with industry leaders behind transforming legacy brands for long-term sustainable growth in the digital age.
Welcome to Bricks and Clicks. This is Cliff Hudson, and I'm here with Craig Miller. Craig, welcome.
Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah, good to be with you. And as before, we're talking about brand building in the 20th century and brand building in the 21st century. And those two centuries with their difference in technology and approach to the business, a wonderful topic that many of us have lived through, Craig and I included. And today we're going to be talking about the role of media during that time. Our guest is Rob Jayson, who is Executive Vice President of USIM. We'll introduce Rob in a moment. We worked with Rob in our professional lives at Zenith when he was with Zenith Media, and wonderful creative analytics that he did for Sonic at that time, and then the implementation of some new plans that was really transforming for our business. Craig and I had the pleasure, of course, working together at Sonic for 8 or 10 years, and no doubt media played a really critical role in building Sonic for the 23 years that I served as CEO. Before 2000, so going back to the 20th century, before 2000, network television was really what it was all about, whether it was a national network or local network affiliates. And our objective at Sonic to grow the business was to grow the business by market, and meaning television market, more outlets, more contributions to local television market co-ops, and in turn, growing the brand market by market. With the new century, that really began to change quite a bit. The change had already occurred before that, but the customers were really changing more significantly as the 21st century began with the emergence of cable television and cable, both local, but also then buying on a regional basis and even a national basis. So Sonic began moving with that as the customer did. The way we moved with that was to get our franchisees, our operators, to contribute not just to the local marketing cooperatives they had, but into a system fund that we created. And we had the creative name for that system marketing fund of SMF, or System Marketing Fund. Over time, 2000 and then 02 and then 04, stepping it up, we went from 0.5% to 1% to even 2% by 2004, 2% of sales going into that system marketing fund. By the time we hit $3 billion in sales in 2005, we were at 2% into a system marketing fund and a little more than 2% still into our local marketing co-ops, which meant that the disproportionate amount of the money being spent on marketing was still going into these local cooperatives. As that decade wound up, 2010, we were in the Great Recession, and business was pretty sluggish. We were trying to figure out, what do we do to get a jolt upwards to our business? In 2011, we hired Rob Jayson's prior firm, Zenith Media. We switched from a local, or rather a regional buyer of media to this national or even international buyer of media. And the objective there, in no small part, was to get with someone buying in scale who could really help us, not just with more economical purchasing, but also kind of an analytical powerhouse to help us analyze where we wanted to go from there. That's when, in 2011, I met Rob Jayson. And what a welcome Rob was to our business then. And so I'd like to introduce Rob. Rob, we're glad you're online with us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Cliff and Craig.
So why don't you spend a moment, all that you want to talk about at the time we met when you were with Zenith, happy to hear, but particularly then about your current position with USIM, Executive Vice President, and your activities today.
Sure. Thanks. We're a small to medium-sized media shop. We look after a bunch of different clients and their media investments, and really, what's changed today is we're even more data and analytics led than we used to be, with so much more data available. And so when we look at clients who have lots of locations, clients who are franchisees, clients who are looking to build brands, the availability of data, which I look after, the customer data that we're able to securely access, the media data that we can track people and their exposure to really is fantastic in terms of being able to quantify the impact of media and quantify how we're contributing towards incremental sales and brand building. And that's really what I'm kind of focused on within this media and kind of new media world.
Well, you were perfect for us then in 2011, and it sounds like still very much in the industry that Craig and I have become steeped in over the decades. So good to have you with us here today, and we'll look forward today to talking about not only what occurred in terms of the shift with Sonic, but really what's occurring in terms of shift in media in the industry generally, and what's occurring now with social and streaming versus cable and other means of distribution of news to try to reach or information, try to reach customers. So thanks for being with us today. We look forward to the conversation. When we connected in 2011, I recall the primary impact in 2011 was the purchasing that you did for us, going from a regional to a national, international buyer, and the scale that you had. We did get a nice bump in sales coming out of the recession, very tough, 9 and 10. But 11, things really stabilizing for us and turning back positive, having in no small part having to do with the better media buying that you were doing. For our listeners' sake, I'll say that one of the things that occurred then, as Zenith was closing out maybe a year, a little less, in May of 2012, we had a franchise leadership retreat, which we did every May. At that retreat, the chair of the Franchise Advisory Council raised something with me that was a surprise. It was an opening of a door that I never thought would open. Rob's coworker, Bobby was her name. She was at this retreat with us, and so we kind of turned on this topic pretty fast and then pretty quickly got with Bobby and Rob to begin pursuing this. But the issue that arose at that retreat was we had core markets who had very strong sales and a very strong brand recognition in the stores in our core market, because there were a lot of them and they were contributing heavily to those local co-ops, and so they had all the local television they could use. We also had stores in newer markets, which we referred to as our developing markets, that didn't have such strong local media. So they didn't have the brand presence. And as a result, they did not have the sales and profitability of those developing markets that our core markets had. The issue that our chair of our advisory council, Franchise Advisory Council, raised with me was, we've got a significant portion of the system in these developing markets, and they're not doing well, he said. And by the way, his name happened to be Bobby, so as well, Bobby Merritt, no longer living, but a great Sonic partner for 40 years. And Bobby Merritt said to me, we've got to do something for these developing markets, or some of them may not survive. Well, my concern was at least twofold. I had a little bit of a hidden concern, which we can talk about today. But the first concern I had was we didn't want those stores going out of business. So that was a real issue. The second concern I had was if new stores in new markets failed, this would cripple our franchise expansion strategy. And that was totally unacceptable. We simply couldn't let that happen, couldn't let either of those things happen. So Bobby had opened a door for us to walk through, i.e., how do we get media to new markets? So I asked Bobby Merritt that very evening, he raised that question. Bobby, do you think if we went to our franchisees and could show them everyone would come out ahead, would they be willing to shift dollars from their local co-ops to a national fund, a system marketing fund, in greater degree than we already were? And Bobby Merritt replied to me, yes, I think they'd do that. Well, that was a shocker because I considered it a virtual sacred cow with many of our franchisees. And so began the conversation with Zenith and with Rob. At that time, what would that look like? How could we do this? Rob, I remember meeting with you and Bobby in New York City then in June of 2012. We had dinner on 6th Avenue, I think, at a steak place. And I'm dropping now what the steak place was.
Del Frisco's.
Del Frisco's. My good memory. Thank you. And it was a good dinner on many levels. But so it might be interesting for our listeners then to hear your comments about the shift at that time and what we had been looking at, how much of our funds, at least half, were being spent locally, and the strategy that you all developed for the reallocation of those dollars, what that would mean for our brand.
It was a great. It was partially a math challenge, and it was a real strategic shift because, as you said, the good performing markets generated more revenue gained from the central marketing fund, but also then generated more money for them to put into their markets in a flywheel that then generated more awareness for themselves and created more business, allowed them to open more franchises and really created those that made those strong markets stronger. But that extra money didn't really work to help build awareness of the brand outside of those best performing markets. And so what we looked at was knowing at that time, and we'll talk about how the world has changed, that particularly cable TV, a national cable TV, and some of these well-distributed cable TV channels, really got strong viewership from the Sonic audience, that younger audience that was core to the Sonic brand, and was distributed across the country, and also got good viewership within those top markets, and was priced. So per 1,000 viewers was priced significantly cheaper per 1,000 viewers in the Sonic demographic than the local media that these top markets was buying. Now, the problem was, of course, the local media was only bought in those top performing local markets, whereas national media was bought across the country. And so we would be buying a bunch of the Sonic demographic that was nowhere near any restaurants. So how did we manage to balance up the balance of moving to a national program in cable TV that bought cheaper impressions, cheaper number of views from the Sonic audience, but also didn't disadvantage those top performers by taking away the concentrated local TV GRPs that we were delivering and moving them to areas where they weren't, and even where there weren't any Sonic restaurants. And this was the calculation, the model that we created. We created a model that allowed us to look at switching that money out, as Cliff had asked whether it was possible to do, from those top performing markets that was spent supporting those top performing markets, that local money, and spending that nationally with cheaper GRPs. How many, if we bought cheaper GRPs, how many GRPs, how many ratings were delivered to those top markets compared to what they managed to buy just in their own local markets? And what we found was that, some of them were a little short of where they were now. But what it did do was then give significant support via those national ratings, TV ratings, to all the other markets, the developing markets that had nothing currently, couldn't afford that local TV and weren't generating the awareness they needed. But the balancing act was then to come back and say, okay, but we need to benefit those big markets too. They have to come out of this equation better than they were. They don't want to spend any more money. They are willing to switch some money to national media and support those developing markets. And so the balance was then to top up those local markets and make sure they benefited by, I think, about 10% above where they were before we started this model. They got 10% more ratings. They switched a bunch of their money to national. And in doing so, then supported those developing markets with media that they'd never seen before.
Well, you're remembering the double-digit increase that we promised to all markets. My recollection, because I had to be involved in selling it, my recollection was that we promised every market they would get no less than a 20% increase in gross rating points. That was a huge selling point. Some got a good bit more than that. And of course, the new markets that had no local television and just a little national cable experienced an enormous increase in gross rating points and a huge impact. But back to your work that you did in that summer of 2012, I think the process that I asked you to engage in from my, at least as to what I asked, it was fairly rudimentary. You all took it to a much more, as we needed, much more sophisticated level of analytics. I also recall then Chief Marketing Officer James O'Reilly coming in and then trying to fit it into a promotional program for the coming months and taking it with you to another level of refinement. So it was, by the time you came back and showed this layering, a lot of it went into national cable, but some of other kind of purchases, and my recollection is even some regional buys. But the quantity that everyone received was a big increase. The quality was exceptional, because now we weren't just advertising on a major football game for the Southeast Conference. It wasn't just an ad being run. We owned the scoreboard, and we were on the, when the fellows were talking about it before the game, we were prominently on the front of their desk, and halftime reports and so on and so forth. So the extraordinary thing was the efficiency of doing this. And again, you made the point, hopefully I made the point earlier, not an increase in $1. It was simply moving to your purchasing power in a different approach. So I do remember, after you had prepared that plan, having dinner with a person, long time franchisee in Oklahoma City, who had been perceived that he might be a stumbling block to getting this done. And so 4 or 5 of us had dinner with him and his partners. And I tried to make sure it was a nice dinner, but more so tried to make sure that it was a good presentation. James O'Reilly, our Chief Marketing Officer, made the presentation. And he showed how, because this fellow was mostly in Oklahoma City with the stores, showed the incredible percentage increase Oklahoma City would get, repeatedly reiterating for this franchise operator, you will not have to spend another penny. James didn't finish his presentation when the franchisee cut him off and said, well, why would we not do this? And so, my reaction was, I don't know if I had a smartphone at the time, but I think I wanted to record the guy saying that, He was our first big sell like that. And then we spent the summer of 2012 running across the system, because our license agreement required that we have 2/3 of the stores approve this before we could require it system-wide. And by August, we had that 2/3. And then at the convention in September in San Antonio, I think, we got the rest of it buttoned up. Once people knew the 2/3 was hit, they kind of folded altogether. I think we had 92 or 93% approval. It was still a little bit too much for some people to swallow, so we had some people vote against it. But it was just in time, Rob, I recall, approved in September, so that 1st of October, the Senate could start buying media geared toward January of 13, because of buying this a quarter in advance. So the implementation worked like clockwork from that standpoint. And I can say, in terms of this strategy that your firm developed and implemented, that we had, our reach did improve dramatically, and not just in core markets, but cross country. And the consequence was, for 4 years, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, this positively impacted same-store sales on a sustained basis. So it was really just extraordinary and a wonderful impact. The other impact it had, you made reference to this. People began saying, when you'd travel, they said, well, listen, I was in South Dakota and I saw your commercials, but there aren't any Sonic drive-ins. I was in Maine and there were commercials, but there weren't any Sonic drive-ins. We did explain to people, look, it's just more efficiently to buy that way. It's like an airplane flies from Boston to LA. It doesn't stop in between in every state. It's got to go over the states, in order to reach this point. And in our case, we had to buy that media because it was more efficient to buy it that way. The consequence, however, was our franchise expansion exploded. And it did start going to these new states where we would never had it, because now brand awareness went through the roof in these new states. So we did start opening in a lot more places we hadn't opened before, and getting interest in places like, no joke, Alaska, Hawaii, So hugely, even transformative impact on the business.
Yeah. And the profile of what we were delivering, so when you move from local media is local news and maybe some morning shows, and that's generally an older audience. It's not really a Sonic audience, but it is a franchisee audience, and the franchisees did like to see themselves in the local news, and so it was a tricky balance. We still maintained some of that, but really that national media, that national cable with sports, with entertainment, it was a younger profile. It really did kind of turbocharge the awareness amongst the younger Sonic audience that helped us to drive those sales.
And as long as the franchisee in Waco, Texas, didn't realize that the Pittsburgh Penguins were getting Sonic commercials, because I do remember at one point somebody said, we were on a Pittsburgh Penguins, well, okay, fine, that hits New England, so leave it alone, But it was a different way to think about it, and everyone came out way ahead, and it did create a lot of running room for us, for years. So great win-win for everybody. And Rob, you and your team, just what a wonderful impact that had. Now, it seems to me what that set us up for, and I had this not just back of mind, but I had a top of mind in 2012 as we were negotiating this. It set us up for a win at the moment by shifting to cable, but we structured the fund this was not a selling point, never raised it, wouldn't have been a selling point. We structured the system marketing fund so once the dollars went in there, as we shifted more towards what we referred to, Craig and I referred to within Sonic as ICE, this integrated customer engagement, where we envisioned one of these days we would shift even away from cable and towards mediums to reach customers more one-on-one, as Craig made the point more than once, utilizing the right medium for the right message at the right time and much more individualized. We saw the potential for that in 2012. And though I haven't been so actively involved in media and marketing in the last several years, there's no doubt that consumers have moved that direction. I think it's safe to assume that your work has moved that direction, so that 10 years ago when you did this for Sonic, moving to cable was an easy decision. But how does that look today in terms of where people get their news and information and the challenge that you have today in the industry?
I mean, it's so very different, and yet, similar, interesting. Now we talk about it. Interesting challenges, building awareness. I mean, Craig, you're absolutely right. We've trained ourselves in today's media world to say all media is accountable. Right? Digital is all accountable. I know the person it's delivered to. I can kind of track what they do. I can track what websites they go to. I can use their mobile device to maybe track where they're going, even with changes to the Apple and Google environment. We're still quite accountable for what we spend. And that's great, except, we build brands by building awareness and repeated viewings, and we don't expect people to immediately respond to a Sonic ad or any fast food ad by saying, okay, in that moment, I'm going to act right now. We expect it to build up over time. But that's not the way that people think about digital media. They think it's an immediate response kind of device, and we should be able to measure the direct impact of every single media impression now, because that's what digital media sold itself on. And so we have to think about how to invest in awareness building and brand building digital media that's delivered to people's households without necessarily saying, I have to see that and track that result right now. And so that's the balance that we have. We very much favor this new model of delivery to the household using data that we can find. So using clients' CRM data to build models and find people who might become loyal customers, using people's behaviors and where they live and mobile data to figure out who lives within a trading zone of any particular store, and not advertising outside of that trading zone, which is very accountable and allows us to deliver the right media to the right person at that time. But just as you were talking about, Cliff, building brands involves investing in the future and showing the ad to people who will come in the future. And that then is the challenge. How do we make that balance of, the responsiveness that we know we can get from digital media and OTT, the ads that are shown in your apps on TV and delivered to you personally, but also, try to build the brand for new customers and new markets that aren't necessarily those ones who are going to respond tomorrow.
Well, Rob, I'm curious about one of the things that I foresaw, and the potential is still there, in this kind of new world as it related to what would become Sonic marketing. We were moving toward the implementation, which is now in place, of our own app. And of course, then as customers would use our app for order, payment, and connection when they pulled into the stall, the level of data that we would start getting about that customer was suddenly going to go straight up. Before, if a customer pulled in, paid with cash, and left, we had no identity at all of them. Now, we not only knew who the customer was, we knew what they had the last time and the last 10 times they came to Sonic. And we probably knew their birth date, or their age, because they'd given us their birth date, and so on and so forth. So I'm curious about, in this new world in which you're operating, we're all operating, but you as a media buyer, media analytics, what is the nature, what we had hoped to move with in Sonic in that context was, historically, the consumer, there was a detachment. Us on the one hand, the consumer on the other, and we would use marketing to make the connection, obviously use the brand experience when they pulled on lot to enforce that connection, but use the marketing to connect with them and hopefully drive them into the store. What we envisioned was moving to a sphere or a data bank, a level of information where we could be marketing to our own customers, and they were known customers. They were regular customers. We'd know their patterns and where they lived and on and on. Are these two different spheres that advertisers now had to focus on and have the ability to? One that's already captured and one that's not. And do you approach that fundamentally differently?
You're completely right. I mean, your vision was totally spot on, right? So building your CRM, your customer relationship management platform, all of capturing your own customers' data and being able to communicate directly with your customers, the number one priority, especially in QSR, fast food restaurants, having and owning your own customers so you can present them with rewards, with offers, with thank yous for their loyalty, their contributions. And you can make sure that if you find that somebody's not returning, you can start to deliver them via email or via their mobile device, special offers to entice them back in. And we are building, so this is part of the media agency world now, is we build using an identity graph. So several companies, usually credit rating agencies like TransUnion, Experian, Axiom, those companies have an identity graph. They have all 270 odd million adults in the US. Those adults are associated with email addresses, with physical addresses, with cell phone numbers, names and addresses, and there's a profile behind those people. And people log on to services using their email. They log on. They use credit. They have apps on their phone, and all those things help these companies to build an identity graph. So I could take Sonic's most loyal customers that comes from your database, the top 20% of your customers who are repeat customers. I don't want to talk to those in media. That's inefficient. You can talk to those people directly, and you would. But I could take those people, find the characteristics about them that are most meaningful for representing why they become local Sonic customers. Well, geography. Right? Geography is very important. Are people near a Sonic restaurant? But what's their income? How many kids do they have? How do they behave with fast food? How often do they buy? And then I can find people who look just like them, people who are lookalikes, we call them, of those top customers who fulfill that criteria in the geography, with the income they have and their fast food purchase habits, but not Sonic. And I can then find those people, use my identity graph to then go and buy those people on Facebook or on Google or via connected TV. I can deliver ads to their household. This is the great kind of digital connectiveness that we have now. So I can find people who look just like your best customers, but are not your best customers, and deliver them a Sonic message, knowing that they could potentially be super, super valuable customers.
Fascinating. Craig, any thoughts there?
Well, Rob, thank you, first of all, the support you gave us for so many years in the brand. My question that I have for you now is now kind of where the world is today, has been, and almost a disruptive time. As I've shared with Cliff, I was always very excited about his vision. When I came into the brand in 9 or 2010, I saw the brand really thinking ahead and trying to position to where the audience was going and staying ahead of that. So of course, early 2000s, cable was the emerging medium. As I started working with Cliff, it was really to begin to position the brand and start to build out, not as a replacement, but as an extension of these new digital mediums, which is where consumers were beginning to move to. Wasn't a replacement, certainly at that time, but we were building the ecosystem, the ICE ecosystem. And the 2012 timeframe, where we still had several years to really build out the digital plumbing across the brand. Your strategy with us, really helped to continue the momentum of the business. More GRPs for less money, particularly in the developing and new markets, which is where our real growth opportunity was, without impacting it, still continue to help drive and fuel core markets. I would really like your perspective on now as we think about the emergence of digital, the emergence of streaming, audience beginning to shift, cord cutters, and shift to these new digital mediums. It really changes the game. And thankfully, we were positioning the brand ahead of that audience as that shifted. But really curious to hear your perspective as we see more audience shift over to these digital mediums, more streaming, more cord cutting. What does that look like, and how should brands be thinking, at this moment about it?
It's amazing how when we talk about this, how quick the change has been. And we think about, traditional TV thought cable was going to be a problem. But when we think about the world today, there is the same level of TV viewing. The same amount of people are sitting, in their living rooms watching the big screen. But what they watch has changed dramatically. The amount of subscriptions to streaming and free streaming services they watch, is ever increasing. And really, the revenue from advertising that traditional TV and cable get is shrinking at an ever faster pace. And it kind of compounds itself. People stop watching in order to watch streamers. So there's less money going to advertising. People are watching less traditional TV. So that traditional TV and cable can't make new shows. They don't have the money to put in to make quality content. So less people start watching it. They start switching off they start cord cutting, as you said. And that's then a spiral, a downward spiral for that traditional TV. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. People are watching the same, but really they're either watching those free streaming apps on their smart TVs, or they're watching Netflix that now has an advertising layer, and that led to their great figures that we just saw coming out from their quarterly return. And the free videos that they get with Amazon Prime. And so it's really, you said the emergence of digital, but it's really the dominance of streaming now. That plus sport is kind of the majority of where we look at for our clients. And rightly, as Cliff said, you own your customer data. I can find people who look like those customers, and then I can deliver ads to their household on their TV screen. Why would I want to go to somebody who's not going to be my customer, who doesn't seem ever likely to be my customer, who might be an empty nester living near a Sonic restaurant, but an empty nester who's never likely to be a first-time trier of a Sonic? I want to go to a younger family or people with a higher income, and I can target those people and deliver my ad directly to their house, and I can then find out whether that person ended up going to a Sonic. If they opt into any kind of service, and I can certainly find out if they download the app. So I'm getting better data. The issue being that although people are watching more TV, more via the main screen, the amount of actual advertising is shrinking. Those streaming services have a much lower load of advertising. So, and then the traditional TV is going away for younger people aren't watching it. So costs are going to go up. The less of the thing they are, the less of a thing. There are the same number of companies who want to reach the same number of people, but there's less advertising. So the costs are naturally going to go up. So it's going to become more expensive. That inflation we've seen in sports advertising, more expensive, which makes it even more important to own your customer data and understand who my future best customers are going to be. And this is where we're at now. This is the focus that we have. It's very different to what we've been talking about in 2012, which was I need to build up my awareness in those markets where my developing markets, and that's the challenge that we face today.
Wow. Well, thank you, Rob. That appreciate that. That perspective, Cliff. All the more kind of credence to where you were thinking, where we were taking the brand and really positioning the brand for where consumers were going. And so it's great to hear that perspective from you, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah, so fascinating transition, and I have to admit, a transition that, in a way, I'm a little bit glad that I didn't have to confront, post 18, but it would make the challenge much greater, and perhaps more interesting. In our case, the direction we were going with Sonic before the company was acquired in 2018 was to build that database that, in fact, would make this new age and stage that you're referring to all that much more valuable.
Absolutely critical. Yeah. It's definitely the first building block that you have to have for really effective and efficient marketing.
Right. Well, Rob, I appreciate you taking time today with us. I appreciate USIM giving you about 45 minutes off so you can come talk to us. But in all seriousness, great to see you again. You had a wonderful impact on our business 10 or 12 years ago. It was a pleasure to work with you, but the impact on our business was just wonderful, and it was such a breakthrough initiative. It would have been interesting to continue with that opportunity, but many of our people are still doing that with many other brands, and hopefully your time today will invite them to engage with you further.
This has been Bricks and Clicks from Forbes Books. If you want to learn more about how traditional businesses can evolve, innovate, and lead with the 21st century customer and ever-changing market conditions, go to bricksandclicks.com and click on how to create your digital roadmap.